Good morning. So we're gonna kick it off.
Maurice, you kick us off, and we're ready to go.
So look, thank you everyone for joining this impromptu session. We have a combination here of people, supporters from the United States, and also major supporters from the UK. We wanted to set up this session because when Paul was in Lviv and Kiev last week, he reported back to the trustee board and to his team in a very direct and real way. And we thought that it would be very useful for everybody to get a sense immediately of his impressions, what he saw, what he understood and felt as a result of assessing the situation and seeing the impact of World Jewish Relief's work on the ground, and the opportunity in a relatively small environment to just quickly share that and get your questions and some discussion. So that's the format. Paul's going to kick it off. I say it's very hot here in the UK. We are likely this weekend to experience the hottest ever day in the United Kingdom, and we're not geared up for it. But I imagine in the US you're more geared up for it, but you're more used to it, but you're more geared up for it. So over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Maurice, and good morning, good afternoon, everybody. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to spend 20 minutes. A quick reminder: why did I go? How did I get there? Because actually that was part of the learning. What did I see, and how do I reflect on it that will influence the slight recalibration of World Jewish Relief's response to the Ukraine crisis? And I will promptly try and finish in 20 minutes, and then very happy to take calls either on the line or people can chuck me questions or pick up the phone at another stage, which will be great. And we're recording it so we can send it to others as well. An important reminder a couple of hours ago, in that people probably know that Vinnytsia was hit by another barrage of rockets fired from the Black Sea, hit a big apartment block. So I think there's 20 people killed. 3 of our clients have had their homes hit this morning, and the Chesed Amuna that both the JDC and ourselves support, sending staff just to go and assess the damage. But I think it was a real reminder, that the conflict is not just confined still to the east, southeast, and northeast. Russian aggression in civilian areas in the center of the country are ongoing and are terrorizing the population. Interestingly, we've got one client arriving in the UK to the Homes of Ukraine scheme, also living in Vinnytsia at the moment, and so additional panic as this family tries to get out. So the situation is very real. It's still very now, even though other issues, of course, dominate in our news. Why did I go to Kiev? I mean, it's pretty obvious. I wanted to spend time with as many of our local partners as I could. Once trustees and ourselves thought that it was safe to do so, to bring some of our partners into Kiev so that we could spend some time, thanking them and praising them for what they've done, but also taking stock and planning ahead. And given the sums of money that we're putting through our partners, I traveled to Ukraine with my head of impact and livelihoods, Katerina Mitaev, who speaks fluent Russian and pretty good Ukrainian as well. We wanted to take the chance just to do a few spot checks on the financial probity, safeguarding standards, and sort of impact metrics that our partners were using. For those of you that have traveled to Ukraine, and some of you have been to Ukraine with me, I can see many of you on this call. I I used to complain about flying to Vienna and then flying to Kharkiv or Zaporozhye or Lviv, or going on the Wizz Air flight from Stansted and feeling that it was a real schlep and a pain. It's even harder now, and basically it's 24 hours of travel. You've got to fly to Rzeszów in Poland. We then traveled by car from Rzeszów to Przemyśl on the Polish-Ukrainian border. We waited for the train, but the train was cancelled coming across from Ukraine. So we took another cab to the border. We walked across the border. We bargained for a cab on the Lviv side. We took a 2-hour journey to Lviv. And then I took this delightful overnight train. I think some of you might have done the overnight train from Lviv to Kiev. If you haven't done, please join me on that journey in future days. It was a slightly cramped train ride. I mean, I had on the way up a first class cabin, which I shared I was very close to my head of impact and livelihoods, and apologies for snoring some of the way there. On the way back, shared the cabin with 5 others. It was 40 degrees in that cabin. You've got to have the blackout blinds on, the lights off, and boy, it was hot. But I realized, how difficult travel is. I was a little bit apprehensive. It was just the day before we traveled, Kiev did get hit by a barrage of missiles, and the Kremenchuk shopping center got hit as well. So I did feel that Ukraine was a little bit nervous. Of course, once I arrived in Lviv and in Kiev, the constancy of air raid sirens is unsettling. I mean, those that I'm sure have spent time in very different times in Israel, the air raid sirens is a haunting sound that I'd never be able to get used to. But I was more unnerved by the Ukrainians' really abandonment of any reaction to those air raid sirens. It was normally, well, I'd say, what are we going to do? And they'd say, well, let's just order another coffee, or let's just order let's get another glass of water or something, and we'll carry on. A bit because there was a paucity of air raid shelters and bomb shelters. And I think the Mariupol theater has made many Ukrainians feel that they'd rather be out in the open if missiles hit than get stuck under rubble. I spent 2 days in Lviv. I spent 2 full days in Kiev, and then another day in Lviv on the way back. What did I see? I met a vast array of our local partners, and through them, I think about 50 clients and participants of our program. There's no surprise, I was struck by the amazing resilience, I say, of our partners, but of Ukrainians in general. I mean, it is incredible that in Lviv and Kiev, many Ukrainians are still going about their daily business as if there isn't a war necessarily going on, recognizing that the conflict is really happening 1,000 miles further east. But Ukrainian resilience and getting on with life and being focused, of course, it is without doubt a personal, patriotic reaction to the crisis. Everybody needs to do their bit. But I was so struck by our partners, exhaustion, incredible commitment, this real personal fervor to contribute to your country's survival, almost. And that didn't just mean doing your job in a humanitarian capacity, but also hosting displaced people at home, volunteering outside your day job with other institutions at other times, really tapping into your networks to ensure that they can also help you. For those of us that might think that the international community has led the response to the Ukraine crisis, think again. This is a crisis that has been predominantly responded to by local Ukrainians in a voluntary capacity at a local level, who have mobilized their own personal resources and led the response. And World Jewish Relief has clearly been able to support our own partners to support them. But by and large, this is a locally Ukrainian-led response, and the international community really is some way behind. The volunteer reach is remarkable. In the 2 days I was in Kiev, I spent one of those days in Irpin and Bucha, two of the cities that were, I mean, pretty much leveled in parts by Russian military. But we got out there with, again, a group of one of our partners' volunteer teams, people that were running restaurants, people that were running retail outlets, people who were running businesses, and we're just mobilizing people to help our partner respond. I was struck by every one of our partners. I mean, there was some gratitude. There was great thanks for the help we'd given. I mean, particularly the initial allocations, early allocations of cash. We know that between February the 24th and really second week of March, the international community had not mobilized cash and got it into the country. We've been, I mean, our first tranche of major emergency funding went in on the 23rd of February, and cash was absolutely critical. So our partners welcomed the fact that we were able to, 22 of the 29 partners that we've had in Ukraine for many years, very operational. 22 of those partners have had constant access to cash. So they liked the support we were giving. They particularly loved the quality of food parcels. I mean, many of you might know, we sourced very early on, mostly with assistance of our royal patron, with the Ukrainian embassy here, massive ready-to-eat stocks and food parcels. I mean, shipped both from the UK via a logistics hub in Poland and a logistics hub in Lviv, but also via from Spain, where we got another major tranche of food parcels. An amazing quality food parcel. I was very struck from our participants saying they loved the meals ready to eat. I mean, it was a slightly obscure range of culinary delights, but they found it really exciting. But the food parcels and the hygiene parcels that were clearly very well thought through. They were carryable. It was 1 week's food and one month's hygiene supplies, targeting particularly older people or women and girls. Very accessible, easily understandable. I mean, there was a question mark about some of the water purification tablets that we had translated the instructions into Russian and not Ukrainian, something we need to learn. But the content was brilliant. But on top of that, thanks, there was an urgency to do more. There was absolutely no doubt that our partners, recognizing that we're still probably closer to the beginning of this conflict and its humanitarian consequences than the end. I should add, I said that, you know, part of our my responsibility being there was to do some due diligence and probity on our partners. I mean, I was immensely impressed at, I mean, and I know we would laugh, but we still insist that our partners keep receipts and are able to ensure that procurement is done in the right way. And I was pleased that, I mean, while we've had to be flexible in some of our rules, the rules still apply, and their financial competence is important. I mean, however many statistics I read, you know, 6 million refugees have fled the country, 7 to 8 million have been displaced in country. Those are just statistics. And however many times I read the stories that these displaced individuals have faced, I mean, nothing is as harsh and tough as meeting groups of displaced, I mean, almost exclusively women and kids. And some, I mean, every person I met had an immensely powerful story, and they wanted to tell the story. I've often found Ukrainians a bit cold and passive, maybe, in their sharing of personal stories. You've got to build a relationship with them before they might want to reveal. But I think in this instance, I found those that were displaced desperately wanted to tell their story. They wanted to tell me how they had escaped, left everything at a moment's notice, taken incredible risks, made some very snap decisions, and after maybe a month or more of travel, overnight here, a week there, suddenly realizing that where they were moving to was also potentially unsafe, then arriving in Lviv or Kiev. This desperate sense that they wanted somebody to hear their story, to sort of validate it, because it was so unbelievable. And I mean, I always take delight in hearing my elderly Jewish clients talk about their war stories, and those stories can be long and amazing, and they're unique. It was the same in this instance as well. You know, very struck by, I mean, there were so many stories. One lady, Luba, I met in Lviv. She had left Severodonetsk early in March, left her house early in March. She spent a month in a basement at the other side of Severodonetsk. Severodonetsk now, of course, is leveled and occupied by Russian forces. In March, it was heavily contested right from the start. She'd spent a month in the basement. She was about 60 years old, Russian speaking. I mean, a tough woman, a really tough woman, who was, I think, worked in a shop. She spent a month in a basement. She had moved quite a lot of her stuff to this basement. And then, I mean, clearly shelling was getting closer and closer, and a Ukrainian police van arrived at the basement one morning and said to this woman, Luba, you got to get out. You got to get out now. And the car's leaving, and she ran. And she ran with her. All she had was a handbag. And I mean, I think it was absolutely distraught for her. I mean, I obviously just saw her last week. I mean, in the time between arriving in Lviv, or leaving Severodonetsk and arriving in Lviv, her house has been totally destroyed. The shop she worked in has been destroyed, and she's pretty much lost everything. I mean, typical Ukrainian stoicism. She was delighted that she took her best handbag, and at least what she had, she could walk down the street with it, and I mean, it was an immense handbag, I have to say. She'd packed a lot in there. But really, when you reduce your 60 years of living to what you can take in a handbag, it was absolutely horrible. So the stories, so many stories of what people had lost, the assets they'd lost, the family they'd left behind, the upheaval was quite remarkable. I noted right from the start, when I was trying to get across the Ukrainian-Poland border, I mean, there was 30 kilometers of cars and people and trucks trying to get into Ukraine. Definitely more Ukrainians trying to get back into Ukraine than are leaving, although there was about 10 kilometers of queues coming the other way. But everybody that I met coming across the border with me had a dog or a cat. There was quite a few gerbils, and there was a lot of budgerigars. And I never, in all my years of working at World Jewish Relief and being in Ukraine, I never realized how obsessed Ukrainians are with pets. So it wasn't just people on the move or cars on the move. There's animals on the move. And I mean, I'm a dog lover myself, and the thought of leaving home without my dog would be traumatic. And Ukrainians have not left their pets behind at all. In fact, you know, I joked in some ways in that a core part of our local partners' response to the crisis was always asking the clients, what did they need? How could we help them? And we have had an unprecedented request for pet food as part of the food distribution. That's something I struggle a little bit with, but if you're going to be client-led, if you're going to be listening to the clients and respond to their needs, we have had to purchase pet food for some of our clients. I was struck, of course, you can't walk around Bucha and Irpin and be horrified at the destruction. You know, the flattening of tower blocks, the targeting of civilian homes, the indiscriminate damage. I mean, the number of cars which were squashed, I mean, passenger vehicles squashed, and you don't just squash a car because it's in the way. I think if you're driving a tank, they've gone out of their way to flatten these vehicles, and clearly human remains within them as well, very evident, and it was absolutely horrible and distasteful. And the level of destruction is immense. So so what does all that, I'm going to quickly speed through. How does that influence my thinking and working together with Stacey Swimer, my international director, and her amazing team of focusing on Ukraine? A couple of thoughts. I mean, I was pleased, obviously, what we've been doing, the scale of what we've been doing is immense, and where we've been doing it. We've been doing the right things in the right places with the right partners. But we know the immensity of this context means that humanitarian need continues to expand and evolve, and resources are finite, or they're still, they're still there, but that we're spending them fast. We've expended, £5 million in 5 months. I mean, that is a vast level of emergency expenditure. 93% of that, I should add, inside Ukraine. Inside Ukraine. So, I mean, where does this shape our next 6 to 12 months? I mean, the first perspective is a refocusing of and targeting of our humanitarian interventions. Our priority is to provide humanitarian assistance to those areas where there is greatest humanitarian need, but lowest humanitarian access. I mean, that is primarily, we know, in the northeast, in the east, in the southeast, bits of the south as well. We have seen the international machinery moving into certainly areas of the west and central parts of Ukraine, and those parts still need assistance, but we really, because of the access our partners have, we're going to even more specifically target those inaccessible areas. I was very struck by many of our clients who have been displaced in Lviv and Kiev, clearly highlighting short-term humanitarian gaps. But for them, and no surprise, they need the cash. They want cash in their pocket so they can start to take some responsibility and decisions for their lives. I mean, the hosts of Ukrainians that have been displaced. So Ukrainians have gone out of their way to host displaced people in their homes. I don't think I met one of our partners or one Ukrainian that wasn't still or had hosted 1, 2, 3 Ukrainian families in their homes. Remember, whatever it is, 8 million Ukrainians have moved westwards and are trying to find somewhere to stay. Now, many of those hosts have been hosting for 2, 3, 4 months in very cramped conditions, 11 to a room, I was hearing. And now that willingness to continue to host is going to wear out. And we need to help people find their own accommodation. To find their own accommodation, they've got to earn some money. And just as World Jewish Relief has been doing for the last 10 years, getting people back into work, earning a living is absolutely business critical. In some ways, the recovery for their lives starts in the immediacy of the emergency context. I mean, I'm terrified about winter in Ukraine at any normal time. We've always provided a very concentrated package of support for elderly Jewish clients and Jewish families, particularly at significant need. That's been traditionally the target group of our winterization programs. I mean, the needs of winter 22-23 are just going to be incredible. The economy is tanking. Government of Ukraine compensation or benefit entitlements or social protection payments can only be negligible. Inflation is rocketing. Energy and fuel and food prices, unbelievably high. Winter is going to be horrible. And therefore, Stacey and the team already winter planning. Now we need to make sure we've got stocks in place, pre-positioned, focus on fuel supplementation, energy subsidies, continuing with our one warm room, particularly for our elderly Jewish clients, part of our home repairs package. And the final thing, I mean, we're still focusing a bit of support on those that have crossed the border into Poland and Moldova. I think we will be ongoing in our support there, but fundamentally focusing attention on those inside Ukraine. And we are seeing an increase in those from Eastern Ukraine now arriving in the UK, and our commitment to be one of the 4 lead agencies in the UK in the Homes for Ukraine scheme will continue. So I didn't come back optimistic. I didn't come back patting ourselves on the back. I didn't come back thinking, job done. I've certainly come back more daunted, probably even more pessimistic about the long-term chronic nature of humanitarian need that becomes harder to address. Sometimes it's easy, we know, easier to give something to somebody, harder to help them find work, harder to help them find accommodation, harder to help them cope with the trauma of what they've been through, harder to help them cope with the trauma of what they're going through because they've still got family members, particularly husbands, sons, fathers, fighting. But I'm proud of what we've been able to achieve so far, and I'm obviously grateful for all of you that have helped us at this stage. And it's sad, I suppose, almost 5 months into the conflict, that we're still talking today about evacuation, emergency evacuations, ongoing emergency interventions, as well as the long-term nature of the context. So I've slightly overrun. Apologies for that. It was a bit of a blur, and it's therapeutic for me to share my thoughts. I'm happy to take any questions from anyone.
Thank you, Paul.
I can see and Andrew Jacobs just highlighted, did I meet the British ambassador, Melinda Simmons, who we know well? I didn't, Andrew, a bit because a British ambassador, a member of Finchley Reformed Synagogue, somebody very close to the community. She's an incredible person. She wanted, I think, to take a day's R&R, which I allowed her to do, but our paths didn't cross. We've connected since, and I'll see her on my next trip to Kiev.
Paul,
Carly,
Carly, did you want to come first and then Ed?
Sure. I just we're supporting a number of organizations kind of across the space, and I'm obviously hearing a lot about the psychosocial support needs, particularly not just the kind of traditional ones, but also the frontline responders, who had been pulling people out of these incredibly hard hit areas, and the lack of resources for the Ukrainians who recognize it's a huge problem, like to actually respond to it. How did you kind of see that, and what do you think the opportunities are there?
Yeah, that's a great question, Carly, and I'm definitely not experienced enough to understand solutions to the trauma. I mean, there was no doubt that everybody I spoke to broke down in tears, to men and women. It was absolutely constant. And I think a bit of that is maybe somebody listening at the story. I was particularly struck by a couple of teenage girls who were lauded by their mothers for how brave and amazing they'd been. And when I asked them directly, how's it been for you? And they just burst into tears, and I felt so bad having asked them. But I was also struck by our own partners, Alexei, Julia, Vladimir. I mean, they looked knackered. They were absolutely exhausted. They were not broken, but they were worn down. But would also say to me, there was still a sense for many, make sure I'm safe, make sure I've got somewhere to live, make sure I've got something to live on. The peer social psychological support, which, I mean, Ukrainians love it to be quite clinical, but I think it's going to need to be much softer, is going to have to be built into every part of our intervention over a much longer period of time. But I think there are probably, at the moment, we're probably best placed to support some practical needs. Through our Back to Work scheme, it was very interesting, where we are physically bringing groups of people together, helping them reassess build their confidence, assess their skills, broker them into work with employers. Clearly, the peer support is providing great psychological peer assistance. So I think there's a sort of massive collective need, but you're right, Carly, that the issue is far, far greater than any of us have anticipated. Ed and then Lynn.
Paul, could you talk a little bit, first of all, thank you for doing this trip. You've also convinced me, lest I have any illusions that I want to be going to Lviv or let alone Kiev. I won't be doing that for quite a while after hearing your experience, but I feel like I got to be there vicariously thanks to your mission. I'm curious to hear more about Homes for Ukraine and the sort of end-to-end opportunities that you see for some small subset of the beneficiaries that you meet, but how are you connecting kind of the World Jewish Relief Network in the UK to this population and your on the ground piece, and what are the opportunities to kind of support and expand that pathway?
Yeah, that's a long question with a long answer, which I'd love, probably best to take. I take it offline for you, but a quick few observations, and it's very interesting. Somebody just ran into my office before I came on the line and showed me a photograph of a young couple and a 9-year-old daughter that have just arrived at one of our homes in the Caledonian Road, just near King's Cross Station, and they were photographed outside the home, and I was struck by the fear in this little 9-year-old girl's face about what on earth am I doing here? I don't know anybody. What's it like? So I think the enormity. I mean, we know, Ed, you're the absolute master. You know the enormity of the trauma of leaving home and arriving somewhere where you're unfamiliar. Even if you're safe, the what you've left behind is so traumatic. I think our early observations here are that a fundamentally flawed scheme. Not enough people have been allowed in. The visa process has been complicated. They've only been given 6 months to stay in one host's home. And so what happens after the next 6 months? A real complexity of needs, huge language problems, and those language problems present massive problems to navigate a benefit system and obviously navigate your way into work. And current English language provision in the UK is pretty pathetic. We're having to very significantly supplement it, trial it through different methods. I mean, we have seen some employment success. I mean, we've got one refugee working here. We're just about to employ another as well. There is a willingness amongst employers, but language is very, very challenging. And we have seen some people already heading back just because, a couple of weeks here and it's so daunting. But I must say Britain's Jewish community has been amazing. I know Andrew Jacobs is here, others involved in this program. It has been a galvanizing way of bringing the community together. But Ed, I'm happy to take up. I mean, there's some big, complex issues there that we're banging on government's door to as well. Lynn.
Great, let's do that. Thanks.
Hi, first of all, Paul, I will echo Ed's sentiments. Thank you so much. The only way we really know what's going on is with people like you doing this incredibly difficult journey. So thank you. I am a global crisis chair for UJA. One of the things I was struck by early on in your comments is your comment that, obviously we want it to be a locally led community response, but that the international agencies are lagging behind their response. I know one of the things we're doing at UJA, and I know you are, is working with partners on the ground. But when you say that international agencies are lagging behind in their response, can you just go into that a little bit more? Is that we're not doing the right things or using right partners? What is your, just clarify that for me if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, Lynn. I mean, I must say, UJ Fed has been fantastic, very proactive on this, and I'm immensely grateful for the partnership and engagement and your engagement, both with us and with other local partners. So you are championing the areas that we want to be championing. I think there was, when I look at the, I mean, I know the humanitarian ecosystem well, and when I look at it, either from within or outside, there is a clear imbalance between where the cash is and where community-led needs and capabilities are. And part of that is entirely understandable, that due diligence requirements of international agencies just cannot be met by community-based actors across Ukraine. And it's been a massive stumbling block for many, certainly the British, but all other international humanitarian agencies. Over the last couple of months, for a local community-based organization to prove to an international organization its bank records, its audit, its legal documentation, its signatories, its policies, its payroll. You can't do it. You just haven't got the capabilities to do it. All of our partners, they were sitting in, for those that know the humanitarian ecosystem, there are very regular UN-led cluster meetings focusing on how can various different thematic sectors, water, sanitation, health, food security, psychosocial protection, how might they, to ensure some coordination. Those meetings are held in English. And as all of you might know, very few Ukrainians speak good enough English. I mean, I sometimes don't understand that humanitarian jargon. They're never going to. So I think there is a discrepancy, and the challenge is that, you know, I mean, I will blow our own trumpet and the JDC's trumpet on this, and other Jewish organizations. We do have an absolute unique advantage to many, many others in that for many, many years, we've established a set of local actors who pass our due diligence standards, who on February the 24th, we trusted right at the start. We didn't have to start the process of trying to find a partner and see if they could be approved by our auditors and our trustees and our bank and whatever. So we were 6 months ahead of others. And that's clearly where the gap has been. I mean, I am frustrated, and people will know, that the collection of British agencies who raised enormous sums of money for Ukraine have only spent something like 50% of their funding inside Ukraine. And that's where really the needs are. So I think trying to continue to prioritize needs inside Ukraine rather than outside are important. But Lynn, I mean, I also recognize that we need to be in this for the long run. And that's the challenge for me. You know, trustees and I have said, for as long as there's immediate humanitarian need, both within, you know, our initial cohort, the Jewish clients, but we're now supporting many, many more beyond the Jewish community. For as long as there's urgent humanitarian need, we cannot sit on monies for the long run. We just know it's just morally so difficult. But what are we going to do in years 2, 3, 4, 5 when this emergency is long gone from our media screens and yet needs are just as high? So I think there's some real dilemmas there. Peter, maybe last question, because I know people are going to have to go and I need to go as well.
I just wanted to thank you for a really harrowing but insightful sort of talk. Firstly, you mentioned that a little bit about the longer term. What does WJR foresee some of the challenges as this does drop from the media, etc., and sort of from both the Jewish and non-Jewish community in the UK, their sort of minds? How is WJR going to continue to support this work and fund this work?
Oh, that's a really hard question, Peter. I mean, you know, the needs in Ukraine are massive, but I also recognize that the resources mobilized are unique, absolutely unique. And I've got, you know, we're World Jewish Relief working in Afghanistan and Ethiopia and Kenya, and none of those emergency contexts are raising anywhere near the size of resources. I mean, Ukraine is core to our business. I mean, we just feel so connected to it. And, you know, even in, you know, in past years, I mean, I worried that there was diminishing philanthropic interest in Ukraine. Now I don't really need to worry about that. But the scale of needs, I think, will always exceed the scale of resources available. So, I mean, our challenge is going to be making some pretty tough decisions on ensuring the areas we focus on have a slightly lasting difference, that we're probably seeking to assist those that others cannot or will not, that we're working hard to get probably a bigger bang for our buck or ask more people for the bucks. And I think so far there's been some good responses there. I mean, interestingly, as I highlighted, Peter, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. You know, most emergencies, you start with an immediate distribution of food, then you start giving out your seeds and tools, and then you gradually recede from the context and you let people look after themselves. I mean, clearly we are still seeing new emergency contexts, new evacuations, new humanitarian needs as I speak. Simultaneously, we're also starting to rebuild homes, get people into work, and try and get people onto a road, a longer term road for recovery. And I think that that multifaceted approach is one that's going to be helpful for us. But sadly, I'm going to continue asking people for support.
So Paul, I'm going to thank you on everybody's behalf. I think that was magnificent. There's a question from Susan Reisenstein that Ed, your question about the homes for Ukraine integration and development was potentially of wider interest. So if anybody else would like to know more about that, we'll take that, Ed and Susan. If anybody else would like to follow up on that, please let us know, and we will organize a session about that. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Really appreciate it.
Lovely to see you all. Take care. Keep cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.